Yeah. Well, there's none. There's like here, then, so there's right. But everything else was
All right, good morning, everyone. We'll let folks continue to wander in here. They're looking for a parking spot. Yeah. I'm going to mainline some coffee here because I didn't get my coffee drinking in earlier because, as I mentioned, Allison had to be here early.
So you usually do coffee and then iced tea?
Or Dr. Pepper, yes. There's some point in the day in which we switch. Yeah, I can only do like 2 or 3 cups of coffee, or I'll end up with problems. All right, for those at home, just like here, it's still Palm Sunday, and hope you'll join us for worship as well. It is what Doug Haney used to call an all skate. You know, when you went to the skating rink and you'd have like, you know, all the girls, all the boys, all the left-handed people, all the right-handed people, and then you'd have an all skate. Well, all skate here is when you have all the choirs. Children's choir, youth choir, sanctuary choir, bells. It's everybody. Yeah, it's like hanging the green.
And palm fronds.
Oh, plus palm fronds.
I think we all get them.
Oh, do we? We all get palm fronds this year?
Yeah, that's how I read it.
What?
Why?
Innovation continues to happen.
I think they're making us all get tactical or in the process of whatever that they're
Okay.
working on us doing.
So we're going to be involved.
What's my word?
Tactile.
I can't think of anything except the poor naked palm plant.
Yeah, like, where do you get that many palm fronds?
I'm sure there's a place you can order them off of
Yeah, they grow them like chicken breasts now. Chickens that are all breast meat. Yeah, we do what we can. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about where I've been in the last couple of weeks. I was just gone one Sunday, but had a lot of travel. And Charlene also wanted me to tell you a funeral story. And I wrote about this in my Friday roundup, but I didn't give details. A couple of weeks ago, really had one of the saddest things I've ever done. And it was a graveside service in Mesquite, and it was a 92-year-old woman. And they had all the chairs lined up under the awning. There were nice white roses on every chair laid out for everyone. And one person showed up to the graveside service. There was no other service. This was it. One person. And it was one of the woman's 10 children. And he only could stay a little while because he had a doctor's appointment to get to. And what do? Right? What do you do in this situation? And there were literally 3 funeral directors and me and one person who didn't want to sit down. And so we just stood by the casket, the 2 of us, and we just had a conversation. And I decided to read the 23rd Psalm, and he began to weep as I read the Psalm, and literally holding on to the casket at this point. And I offered some words of encouragement, offered a prayer of committal, and that was it. And, you know, there's nothing I could do to change any of that. The wind was blowing. It was a windy day, windy spring day here, and the wind was blowing through there. At least it wasn't raining or blowing dust. And
Did he say anything about why no siblings?
some of them lived in another state and couldn't get there. Some of them he thought were coming and didn't come. Yeah. What are you going to do? right? So we do the best we can with what we have, and that's what happened there. On a happier note, last weekend, a week ago today, I was in Washington D.C. The reason I couldn't be here was I was at a summit for religious freedom put on by Americans United for Separation of Church and State. And it was a fabulous event. It was 2 days long. It was Sunday and Monday. And right now, last week, I was hearing Jamar Tisby speak, who is an author and professor at Simmons College of Kentucky, and we quote him a lot. And he was talking about the influence of the black church on America and how we can learn from the black church today and its resilience. And it was an excellent presentation. We heard from a woman named April Ajoy, who is a former far right evangelical who's found the light and come the other direction. And she's written a book called Star Spangled Jesus. What's funny is she wanted us to know she really had been in the soup on this, and she played a clip for us, a video clip of her as an 18-year-old singing a song on the Jim Bakker Show, which I bet you didn't even know there still is a Jim Bakker Show, right? And the song, she had written it to go along with a bus tour her Pentecostal pastor father was doing. That's the title of the song and the title of the bus tour was "America Say Jesus." It was awful, and she was like very embarrassed to show it to us as well. We also heard from Randy Weingarten, who is the president of the American Federation of Teachers. She's a Jewish woman talking about threats to public education and what's going on with all this as well. And then one of the most other interesting people who is, for anyone who might be going to CBF General Assembly, she's speaking there this summer. Her name is Angela Denker, Denker. And she's got a new book out called White Something Jesus. It's research into how this toxic masculinity is reaching down into young men today and pulling them to the far right. She's a Lutheran pastor from, I think, Minneapolis area. Really fascinating as well.
Disciples of White Jesus?
Disciples of White Jesus, yeah. Angela Denker, Denker. I recommend anything she's done. She, of course, what makes her good too is she started her life as a journalist before she went to seminary. As a sports journalist. Do y'all know how rare it is to have a female sports journalist? Yeah, she's tough as nails if she can do that, for sure. So that was a really interesting event. Saw people there. And then I flew back Monday night, and Tuesday morning I was up early and over at SMU for a conference on the influence of religion on journalism in Texas. So this was a much more specific thing. And it was put on by SMU and by the Texas Tribune and by Religion News Service. And a bunch of us were there. A bunch of my journalism friends were there. We all met up. And it was an interesting crowd. The opening speaker, the opening keynote for this was by someone who some of you met here, Robert P. Jones, Robbie Jones of Public Religion Research Institute, who has become a friend through all of our correspondence back and forth. And we publish him from time to time. If I had thought ahead in time, I would have gotten a TV in here because I've got some slides from him that I'm going to publish that are very Texas specific. So I'll let you know when I get around to writing about that this week. But part of his presentation was about how Texas compares to the nation in white Christian nationalism and in support for certain things. And I'll just give you the Cliff Note version of it all based on their enormous data sample. It's really some of the most reliable data out there. As you might surmise, on the political front, Texas skews a little more to the right than the nation. But not as much as you would think. It's a few percentage points, not dozens of percentage points. And when you get down to things like support for same-sex marriage, support for abortion, support for multiculturalism, overall, the support in Texas is beyond, it's a super majority of support for these things that are being attacked right now.
He did go to West Texas and right?
Yeah, here's the problem. When you break it down by other measures, the picture changes. And the outlier to every question that they ask is if you are a white evangelical Protestant. And support for any of these things that most of us would care about, or want to talk about at least, is literally half in that population of what it would be in the general population in Texas. This is a more severe statement of what we see on the national trend. But here's the other thing, and this is the main thing I want to point out for us today, because look around this room, and you know, the majority of us are above age 60 in this room. Not everybody, but the majority, right? And some well beyond that, right? And we are white, and we've come out of evangelicalism, all of us in a way. And I want you to understand what a dodo bird we all are. We are going extinct. So the percentage of people like us in Texas is somewhere in the 15 to 20% range.
Okay, define what you mean by...
I mean older, white evangelical Christian. That's exactly what I mean. And his measure is 65 and above. So that captures the majority of people in this room, right?
You forgot to mention the Attorney General, who had evidence well against him, but the Senate voted him in.
Well, these things over and over again, right? So here's the next shoe on this, though. When you look at all of this demographic data on all these questions, the younger you are, the more left-leaning you are on these questions, the more embracing you are of same-sex marriage, the more embracing you are of diversity and all of these things. You've heard this said before, but I mean, I'm just telling you, it is in the numbers. You can document it. What we're living through right now is the dying gasps of white supremacy. And white supremacy, when I link together everything I've heard from all these places the last 2 weeks, is deeply rooted in the evangelical church, and we all grew up in it, whether we know it or not. Unless you grew up in, I don't know, Mexico. If you grew up, particularly in the southern United States, if you grew up in an evangelical Christian church, this is just the air we breathed. And we're coming to grips with this. And some people are coming to grips with it by changing, and others are coming to grips with it by fighting against losing privilege. But the numbers, to quote the Bible, the handwriting is on the wall for where we're going demographically. And this is why it is so urgent that we persist. Because those who want to retain control are trying to rig the system so they'll always have control, even though they're a minority. And what we live in Texas right now is minority control. So go back to this statistic on any of these things: same-sex marriage, abortion access, multiculturalism, diversity. Within Texas, there are super majorities of people who support all of these things. But if you look at the representation in the in the Texas House and Senate, it does not reflect that. Why? Well, several reasons. One, because of gerrymandering. But two, because of the way the primary system works in Texas. And we are in a situation where the most extreme candidates on either side get elevated through the primary system because that's just the way it's worked out. So there's a lot to be said about this, but the thing I want to say about all of this is we've got to keep persevering. We've got to not lose heart. We've got to keep standing up because it does make a difference, and this is a long game, not a short game. Yes.
At any of the things you've attended, has anybody discussed something that to me is totally inexplicable? Why the Republicans have so much support among blacks and Hispanics?
Yes, so this was a question exactly asked of Jamar Tisby, who's black, and he's a scholar who deals in this. He's a historian, and his answer, I'll get to the Hispanic answer separately in a moment. His answer for the black community is, if you look throughout history, I'm going to use a phrase here. There have always been Uncle Toms. There have always been people of color. But he said, if you watch any of them, if they're commenting, and they're going to have zero support from the black community, they're outliers, right? So these kind of people they get a lot of attention because they're so rare, right? Now, Hispanic answer is a different answer. And this has also been discussed, and Robbie Jones talked about this in his data as well. And again, if I could show you his charts, you would see some of this. Increasingly, Hispanic evangelical Protestants act more and more like white evangelical Protestants. Why? Well, part of it is the influence of religion, and part of it is the influence of an ideology that maybe has even come from another country into this country, which is why you'll find people who are immigrants who fought their way in who say, Trump would deport me, but I would still vote for him. It is some sort of ideology that's brought over. Look at the Cuban bloc in Miami. Decidedly conservative and Republican supporting because they're so against communism, right? It's this, and they work against their own interest in this. So this is a trend worth noting. But the other thing that everyone I've heard about the Hispanic vote says is it is much more pliable than you think. And a lot of it is affixed specifically to Trump, not to the Republican Party. There's an admiration for a strong man, right? Whether you like it or not, this will not always last. And there's a case to be made that Democrats treated, Hispanics in South Texas bad and neglected them for years, took them for granted. All these things can be said. All these things are true. So it's a lot there. But let me go back to Jamar Tisby, who the whole of his speech was, everyone needs to learn from the resilience of the black church that has stood up and endured injustice and continues to offer a way through today without selling out. And, I think the black church is very different than the Hispanic evangelical church. And again, I'll write some more about this week. Why am I telling you all this right now when we're going to talk today about Habakkuk? There actually is a connection, as there is every week, to the minor prophets. Because the minor prophets parallel our time in such a way that every week I open up the scripture and I think it is eerie what's happening. Habakkuk is a weird little book stuffed in the end of the Old Testament. And it's different than the other prophets in a number of ways, one of which is it doesn't begin with any credentials for Habakkuk. We don't even know who Habakkuk is or was. There's no other reference to Habakkuk as a person within Scripture or that we've even found elsewhere. So another funny thing is the name Habakkuk. A lot of these prophets have names that have spiritual meanings. The word Habakkuk has something to do with nature. It's not spiritual at all. The other thing that's different about Habakkuk is it's more of a conversation between Habakkuk and God. It's not a prophecy against the people so much as it's a complaint against God for what's going on. And then as you'll see at the end of the book, the third and final chapter of the book is totally different than chapters 1 and 2, and it is pretty much in the form of a psalm. It's described as a prayer of Habakkuk to God. But you could lift it out of there and put it in the Psalms and no one would even blink because it reads so much like a psalm. So these are some ways in which this is different. When is this book written? It's about 100 years later than Nahum that we studied 2 weeks ago and got through as fast as we could. Right? Fast and not fast enough still. Yeah. It's about 100 years later. So the Babylonian captivity is coming sooner. I have to stop and think Assyrian, Babylonian, because there's 2 layers to this, right? So this is on the brink of captivity, and Habakkuk is concerned because evildoers have taken over everything, he says, and are acting like they're just and righteous when they are not. Sound familiar to anyone? Right? We will not be held accountable. We will not do the right thing, but we are the righteous ones. His time is our time, in a sense. And the other thing, there's several things I struggle with before we get to the text. There's some things I struggle with all the minor prophets, but especially here, is Habakkuk, like Nahum, Habakkuk, like Nahum, sort of begins with an understanding of a vengeful God, a God who believes in retributive justice, retribution. And that's not what we know of God through Jesus, but it is very common in the Old Testament. And so once again, we've got to sort of read this with an eye that this is an ancient culture with a different understanding than what we have today about the way things work and about the way God works, but it's still very challenging to us because of that. So with that in mind, let's open, and by the way, there are some greatest hits out of Habakkuk. You're going to be surprised because you will recognize there are some passages you know.
Is the way you say it, Habakkuk, is that an Oklahoma weed?
How do you say it?
Habakkuk. Most people down here say that.
Habakkuk. I don't know. I need to look up what the right pronunciation is.
Comment?
Yes, we have a comment. Can you help us?
Okay, Kristen Roberts
Yeah.
says, I think the election results showed that Hispanic women voted for Trump 10% points less than Hispanic men. I usually hear people talk about the increasing Hispanic vote for Republicans without mentioning it is a male-dominated phenomenon that goes hand in hand with the overall masculine drive in our country. Sorry to add this after Mark has moved on.
Well, no, she's right. Yeah, you're right. It is machismo. This is what's driving a lot of this, right? Which also ties in to Christian nationalism, which is a hierarchical thing where you have men above women. This is why there is so much emphasis right now within conservative evangelicalism about men having dominion over women.
Well, there's also the thing, if you are Hispanic and you can vote, you have made it to a position, you have gotten your paperwork, or you've come in somehow that you're legal, and now they're going, yes, we want to push this, the idea of push for the legal status only coming in, because we did it, they have to do it too.
Yeah, there's so much I can say about that. It would take us the rest of the lesson.
Well, that, and also the sanctity of life thing.
Yeah, abortion is a big part of it. And and Catholics skew. Well, what's interesting is, in the national polling data, white evangelicals score much more aggressively on being motivated by abortion than any Catholic does. Yeah, than Catholicism as a whole. So you just chew on that one for a while.
Well, and if you watched any of the Masters yesterday, Rory McIlroy is very Irish and very Catholic, has been divorced almost twice.
Almost twice.
Well,
So like 1.5 or what?
against wife number 2, and then the papers were withdrawn.
Yeah, okay.
Catholics are pretty flexible.
All right, I want to get us into this book that we sometimes call Habakkuk and sometimes call Habakkuk.
Which version are you in now?
I am in the NRSV today. Yeah, I finally figured out how to get back to that. So the beginning of the book simply says, the oracle that the prophet H saw. O Lord, how long shall I cry for help and you will not listen? Or cry to you violence and you will not save? Why do you make me see wrongdoing and look at trouble? Destruction and violence are before me. Strife and contention arise. So the law becomes slack and justice never prevails. The wicked surround the righteous. Therefore judgment comes forth perverted. Anybody feel that way this week? Hello? Man stuck in an El Salvador prison. The Supreme Court says you have to bring him back, and we don't want to bring him back. We don't even know where he is. Judgment becomes perverted. Look at the nations and see. Oh, sorry. Pause. This flips now to the voice of God. Look at the nations and see. Be astonished. Be astounded. For a work is being done in your days that you would not believe if you were told. For I am rousing the Chaldeans, that's the Babylonians, that fierce and impetuous nation who march through the breadth of the earth to seize dwellings not their own. Dread and fearsome are they. Their justice and dignity proceed from themselves. Their horses are swifter than leopards, more menacing than wolves at dusk. Their horses charge. Their horsemen come from far away. They fly like an eagle swift to devour. They all come for violence with faces pressing forward. They gather captives like sand. At kings they scoff, and of rulers they make sport. They laugh at every fortress and heap up earth to take it. Then they sweep by like the wind. They transgress and become guilty. Their own might is their God. This is the equivalent in this time of a prophet coming in America to say, you don't like the way things are going right now? Just wait. God is going to send the Iranians to take over your country. God's going to send China to take over your country. God's going to send Russia to take over your country in judgment on the evil that's being done. And yes, I know they're evil too, but what the prophet is saying here and what God is saying through the prophet is, and this is hard, y'all, this is weird, that God is going to use another evil force to rat out evil among God's people. I don't get it. And neither does the writer of this book, whose name I can't pronounce. So then we go back to Habakkuk.
There you go.
I got to go home and look this up.
Like tobacco.
Are you not from of old, O Lord my God, my Holy One? You shall not die. O Lord, you have marked them for judgment, and you, O Rock, have established them for punishment. Your eyes are too pure to behold evil, and you cannot look on wrongdoing. Why do you look on the treacherous, and are silent when the wicked swallow those more righteous than they? You have made people like the fish of the sea, like crawling things that have no ruler. The enemy brings all of them up with a hook. He drags them out with his net. He gathers them in his seine. So he rejoices and exults. Therefore he sacrifices to his net and makes offerings to his seine. For by them his portion is lavish and his food is rich. Is he then to keep on emptying his net and destroying nations without mercy? Here is the prophet's plea to God. How long? How long, O Lord? How long is this going to keep happening?
Sane.
So do y'all know what a seine is?
A river.
No. Oh, yeah, no. So I learned this from my grandfather who fished on the Red River. A seine is a net that it's not just any net. It's a large net that you use to bring up fish out of the water, right? They get caught in the net. And there's different forms of this. So,
Use it for crabbing, and you can use it for catching minnows.
for minnows, okay, interesting.
Or it's a round one.
Right. So it depends on how fine the mesh is, right?
Bass too.
Yeah. So this would have been in fishing in this day as well.
So you're saying it was basically insane.
Insane. Yes. So here's the prophet's lament. And then the first couple of verses of chapter 2 are still the prophet, and then we switch back to God. I will stand at my watchpost and station myself on the rampart. I will keep watch to see what he will say to me and what he will answer concerning my complaint. Then the Lord answered me and said, and here's a familiar verse, y'all. Write the vision and make it plain on tablets so that a runner may read it. For there is still a vision for the appointed time. It speaks of the end and does not lie. If it seems to tarry, wait for it. It will surely come. It will not delay. Look at the proud. Their spirit is not right in them, but the righteous live by their faith. Now, some of these words ought to sound familiar to you. And there's a reason for that. The only part of this book that makes the Revised Common Lectionary that is in our preaching and teaching cycle in the church is chapter 2, verses 1 through 4. That's what gets plucked out. I have seen verse 2 used in strategic planning work and capital campaigns in churches. Write the vision and make it plain. And what he says is, put it on a poster, make it so big that a runner passing by could read it and think billboard, right? He's saying make the vision so plain that you could put it on a billboard. And so this is inspiring language that gets plucked up out of this minor prophet and used in the church to talk about how we're going to do this or we're going to do that as well. But then in verse 3, this gets picked up. If it seems to tarry, wait for it. It will surely come. It will not delay. In Hebrews chapter 10, beginning in verse 32, listen to this, and you'll find the echo. But recall those earlier days when, after you had been enlightened, you endured a hard struggle with sufferings, sometimes being publicly exposed to abuse and persecution, and sometimes being partners with those so treated. For you had compassion for those who were in prison, and you cheerfully accepted the plundering of your possessions, knowing that you yourselves possess something better and more lasting. Do not, therefore, abandon that confidence of yours. It brings a great reward. For you need endurance, so that when you have done the will of God, you may receive what was promised. If it seems to tarry, wait for it. It will surely come. It will not delay. This is the reference that happens here. But in the next verse, verse 4, look at the proud, their spirit is not right in them, but the righteous live by faith. The righteous live by faith. And this gets quoted verbatim by the Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 1, verse 17. For in it, the righteousness of God is revealed through faith for faith. As it is written, here's the quote, the one who is righteous will live by faith. So here's an interesting thing where you have Paul quoting one sentence from this minor prophet, which helps us understand several things. One, those raised in Judaism in the ancient world knew this prophet. It was not neglected there. And number two, Paul thought this was so important that he needed to spend a whole section of Romans out of this one verse, which he goes on, and you can read about that if you want to. But the righteous will live by faith. So what is God saying to the prophet in this time? It is a message of enduring with faith, even when it looks like the world is crumbling around you. And that is much easier said than done, y'all. Much easier said than done. Particularly, what's particularly insidious about it to me is, like many of y'all, I grew up in a culture that taught me that we were the persecuted minority in the nation because we believed in God and we were evangelicals. Even though we were a majority, we were a persecuted minority, and therefore we had to just live by faith. And now the people who taught us to live by faith are the persecutors. And the way this is flipped, it's no wonder people are leaving the faith, right? Because everything seems upside down. But this is also the world in which the prophet lived. And here's the message coming through repeatedly. Those who are righteous will live by faith. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Anyone else struggling with this?
I wonder, how do you get between whether God's talking or Habakkuk's talking?
Well, it's just the language. Yeah, because you can just tell by the tone.
It seems to go from verse to verse.
It's section to section. Yeah, Donna.
You said you grew up, or we grew up with thinking that Christians were persecuted, right? Or something.
Right.
I didn't grow up that way. And I think it's a perspective of where you grew up and when. I grew up in East Texas, and honey, let me tell you, Southern Baptist was it. The Methodist, well, you know how they sprinkle, and let's don't count them. But it was all Southern Baptist. And all of these Texans, let me tell you. So we didn't feel we were persecuted. We even heard the word persecuted. It's just this is who we are. If you're Christian, you're evangelical. Period. End of story. So I think it's a perspective of when and where you grew up and what
Oh, I think that's true. Now, and when I say this, the typical message was not that we were persecuted locally, because we controlled everything locally, right? It's that we were persecuted nationally and internationally.
See, I never heard that either.
Yeah.
It wasn't even in the Bible.
Again, it's the liberal elites are out to get us, and they're going to force their. I mean, this goes back to the 70s, y'all. This is not a new idea. This is why. This is the very reason Jerry Falwell started the moral majority.
But I grew up in East Texas too, Southern Baptist, and Southern Baptists are not like the Southern Baptists that we have today.
Oh, well, that's a fair point too. Southern Baptists are much more conservative today than they were because hello, here's a great word. There was more diversity among Southern Baptists then, right? Interesting. In those days, you had more diversity among Southern Baptists, but the leaders of the Southern Baptist Convention tended to be more moderate and less reactionary. And this is what the whole conservative movement, Fundamentalist Takeover, was about. Was those folks didn't like that. They wanted control. And y'all, I've said this over until I'm blue in the face, and I will believe it to the day I die. If you want to understand what's happening in American politics today, go back and look at the Southern Baptist Convention 30 years ago. It is the very same thing happening on a national scale. It's the same people. It's the same ideology. It's all there. Now, that's not to say it only comes out of the Southern Baptist Convention, but it certainly is what we saw with the power plays and the politics to use the rules, to change the rules, to manipulate the rules, to get control, and to drive out, literally drive out, people we don't like. And this is what's happening in America today as well. So much, I mean, that could be a whole seminar right there.
Okay.
Yes, a question? All right.
No, Mary Early looked up pronunciation.
Oh, yes.
And both are correct.
Ha! Ha!
There's all kinds of videos too. I looked it up.
Okay.
To tell you how to do it.
So I can say Habakkuk can be fine.
Yeah, absolutely.
You had mentioned about the black church.
Yes.
I think it was Berman said that's based on the black church in America.
Yeah.
The difference.
Yes.
If you look at slaves, when they were converted, they were looking for Jesus to come tomorrow because that would have freed them.
Right.
And I think the enthusiasm in the black church is, it comes from that. And because it's faith. You depend on your faith. And their faith was that they're enslaved now. I won't be when Jesus returns. I won't be enslaved.
So you've got to look for a better day. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is true of all sorts of persecution. True persecution, y'all.
Yeah.
Not fake persecution.
Like the Christians were in the early church, how they were
Yes, because they were a minority. They were working against the empire, and they were not the empire. This is a very easy thing to understand. All right, let's move on. Verse 5. Moreover, wealth is treacherous. The arrogant do not endure. They open their throats wide as Sheol. Like death, they never have enough. They gather all nations for themselves and collect all peoples as their own. Again, sound familiar to anyone? Verse 6. Shall not everyone taunt such people, and with mocking riddles say about them, alas for you who heap up what is not your own? How long will you load yourselves with goods taken in pledge? Will not your own creditors suddenly rise, and those who make you tremble wake up? Bond market. Then will you be booty for them. Because you have plundered many nations, all that survive of the people shall plunder you, because of human bloodshed and violence to the earth, to cities and all who live in them. Alas, for you who get evil gain for your houses, setting your nest on high to be safe from the reach of harm. You have devised shame for your house by cutting off many peoples. You have forfeited your life. The very stones will cry out from the wall, and the plaster will respond from the woodwork. This is better than if walls could talk, y'all. This is if walls could have vengeance, right? The other interesting thing in that is this reference in verse 11, the very stones will cry out from the wall, is an echo of a psalm where we're told if we don't praise the Lord, the very rocks will cry out. And there is in both of these passages a sense of creation bearing witness to us. Yeah.
That phrase was in my devotional reading this morning in Luke 6:32 through 36. Now I have to get there, but it
Yeah.
talked about the stones crying out, and it referred to it somewhere in here, but that was just interesting, that phrase.
Yeah, no, it's a beautiful turn of phrase, and it's not unique to this one place, is the point I want to make. The idea here that the prophet and the response from God are getting at is that there is inherent in creation a sense of justice. And this is why, I mean, you can deny climate change all day long and twice on Sundays, right? But it doesn't mean it's not real. I mean, the fact that you deny it doesn't change reality. And the fact that you deny God's intent for the world does not change God's intent for the world. We cannot change the way that is. And that's why there is, I'm not going to use the word karma, but that concept that there is some inherent justice built into the world. It's just not fast. It's not fast. And this is one of the biggest problems I have with this prophet and most of the minor prophets, even the major prophets, is they prophesy God's judgment, but not right now. And we want help this moment. We want to be out of this. The other thing that occurs to me, and I'm pressing my time, I know. The other thing that I'm really struggling with is we predominantly white American Christians have never before now lived in the reality of the rest of the world. We have lived in a bubble in which we've had a lot of control. And the majority culture in the world of Christians do not experience that kind of culture. We are now moving into a kind of culture that is much more akin to what the rest of the world has lived in, which ironically is being wrought by people who thought they were being persecuted when they had privilege, right? The irony is just rich on all of this. But one of the things that tempers our complaint against God is that we've had a unique privilege that we have squandered, that the rest of the world has not had. And I don't have any good answers on this. I'm just telling you, I struggle to understand this. All right, very quickly. I want to get to. I want to highlight a couple of other hits here. When we get into chapter 2, verse 14, here's another phrase you know. But the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. I've seen that like cross-stitched before. I mean, that's, it's a great quote to pull out, right? And the context is God's judgment on the world for all that's happened. But the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea is a statement of God setting things right, sometimes painfully. And then the very last verse of chapter 2 is another one that you know. But the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. The church I grew up in had a balcony, and there was like a trim rail underneath the balcony that it was like it had a curve. And someone had at some point taken poster board and cut it in a thin strip so that it would fit up in there like it was a rack. And they had handwritten scriptures to meditate on and worship. This was one of them. I grew up seeing this in church every Sunday. Just this one thing taken out of context. Chapter 3 is the prophet's prayer. And this is the thing that sounds very much like a psalm. It begins being labeled a prayer of the prophet, according to something or other, right? O Lord, I've heard of your renown, and I stand in awe, Lord, of your work. In our own time, revive it. In our own time, make it known. In wrath, may you remember mercy. Now, there is the best line of the whole book. In wrath, may you remember mercy. Because of your anger, may you remember to be merciful toward us. That is some fine writing right there. The very end of this psalm, that is the song that concludes this, one of the reasons we know it's a song is it says, there's a note to the leader, play this with stringed instruments. just like the Psalms say as well.
What does verse 3 mean? It sounds like
God came from Teman, the Holy One from Mount Paran. His glory covered the heavens, and the earth was full of his praise. That one?
they put a location on where God came from.
Oh, so I think that's simply sort of anthropomorphizing. That's it. That word. Yeah. It's sort of giving human qualities to God in a regional understanding, right? That's like, you know, if you've been to camp and there's maybe a hill at camp and everyone describes, you know, the Lord coming from, it's just that kind of.
God on the mountaintop.
Right. It's that kind of thing, right? Indeed. So if you read this, you'll see over and over again. It's a long. Like I would not want to sing this song. I mean, Bob Dylan's easier to understand than this. It ends with this, and I'll end with this. I wait quietly for the day of calamity to come upon the people who attack us. Though the fig tree does not blossom and has no fruit is on the vines, though the produce of the olive fails and the fields yield no food, though the flock is cut off from the fold and there is no herd in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will exult in the God of my salvation. God, the Lord, is my strength. He makes my feet like the feet of a deer and makes me tread upon the heights. And that's it. The last thought I would give you is that this final psalm of Habakkuk echoes Job. You could take this minor prophet in one hand and Job in the other hand and find a lot in common. Because ultimately this book is about learning to wait in patient faithfulness for God to set things right. And Job, very much like this, is saying, though the fields yield no food, though the flock is cut off from the fold, though there's no herd in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. This is a hard lesson, but it is a recurring theme in the Bible that God is a God of justice, but justice does not always happen on our timetable. Yuck. Not what I want to hear,
So
right?
my social security check didn't come next week, I should.
That's right. Right.
What's going on with the building? Can you hear it? Somebody's bowling up there.
I think there's doing something upstairs.
Pinball up there.
Okay.
So that they're running around and.
I keep
Well, they're
thinking,
moving chairs.
the other churches who have different, we're
Right.
preaching against, about, they're doing the same thing, talking about other churches like this one. And they're saying they are able, and we are being persecuted as being evangelicals.
Yeah.
They're talking about other churches and other denominations. Kind of the same thing. They're saying they're being persecuted. They're going through, how long will we have to go through this?
Yeah. Well, not everyone who claims to be persecuted is actually persecuted.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll quote the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. That's the best advice I have. I'm out of time. We got mainly through this book. Thank God.
What's next?
Zephaniah.
Oh, how many are there?
We're getting close. Yeah. But at least we got some variety now. Yes.
Can I tell you one interesting thing?
Yes.
To do a 180. I was watching a program on the Discovery Channel last week, and it was about an archaeological dig in Jordan, Tel El Hammam, and it's the perfect spot, the perfect time. It's a huge excavation to have been Sodom and Gomorrah,
Oh.
and it shows every sign of a meteor strike, which would, I mean, it turned sand to glass, and so nature miracles.
Wow. Okay. That's worth looking up.
It is.
Yeah. All right. Let's pray together. And thanks to everyone who's joined us online from all over the place today. God, grant us grace to persevere. Help us to have faith that keeps going even when we do not understand. We pray through Jesus Christ. Amen.